Hey guys, tonight we step into a courtyard lit by flickering torches. The air thick with burning pine and ancient tension coiling around you like a silent serpent. You might feel the heat on your cheeks already, though you probably won't survive this scorch test if you're prone to fainting at bright lights. You'll probably notice a faint tingle at the nape of your neck as expectation builds. The more you listen, the more you'll feel the flicker in your brain, subtle like embers waiting to ignite. Before we torch our way deeper, take a slow breath. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments below so we can see how the flames dance across your own horizon. I promise there's no prize for being the farthest away, the warmest round of digital applause. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward into a circle carved from sandstone, each block warmed by smoldering embers that hiss like distant serpents. The smell of charred wood clings to your clothes, attempts of pine sap curling in the air. In 1750 BCE, Babylonian magistrates under the Code of Hammurabi formalized trial by fire to settle disputes, believing divine intervention would reveal the truth. That law code, etched onto towering stele, laid out what we now call ordeal by fire. Touch a heated iron bar, and if your wounds healed swiftly over 3 days, you were absolved. If not, guilt was written in your scars. Your heartbeat echoes. Against damp stone, each footstep a soft drum. Flickering shadows dance like restless spirits, elbowing each other for space. Inhale deeply, you catch a hint of incense mixed with smoke, as though old rituals exhale alongside the flames. The officiant emerges wearing soot-smudged robes, carrying a strip of cloth imbued with rancid butter. They claim that if the butter melts and drips freely down the accused palm, innocence is proven. If it congeals into stiff lumps, guilt is sealed by divine decree. That belief feels like urban legend. What butter can't reveal a GPS transcript? Could but some villages swore by it. You're tempted to test it on your breakfast toast, wondering if maple syrup might fare better. A medieval baker once insisted melted butter exonerated him from hoarding grain, though skeptics suspected he bribed the cleric. The butter glistens in lamplight, golden as a promise, or perhaps as a trap, and the faint stink of rancidity curls. Toward your nostrils, the accused, a young potter named Ibarra, steps barefoot into the circle, eyes wide with dread and determination. A hush falls thick, palpable, so heavy it feels like a wet blanket pressing on your chest. Then a scholar's whisper cuts through the hush. Historians still argue whether the ritual's root was spiritual reckoning or social control. Was this moment truly divine arbitration, or a theatrical performance to keep average folks in line? You sense the crowd's pulse sinking to each creak of burning timber. The priest intones ancient Akkadian syllables that vibrate through your ribs like a distant drum. And even the stones seem to hum in response. Ibarra extends his right hand, palm up, muscles trembling. The priest presses the buttered cloth onto an iron bar heated white-hot over coals. A sizzle erupts, an auditory explosion that sends a shiver up your spine. The aroma, an odd mix of scorched fat and molten metal, fills the air, making your stomach roil. Ibarra's eyes squeeze shut, and you hear a single, sharp inhale that's almost a scream. His hand jerks, then goes still. Sweat beads on his forehead in the torchlight. You imagine the sting of molten butter sealing itself to flesh, and you're thankful you only have to watch. You probably wouldn't survive more than a few seconds if that were your skin. Jokes race through your thoughts. Next time you burn. Dinner, picture having to present the charred casserole as evidence of innocence. Or imagine applying aloe vera in quartet might be the defense of champions. A third smirk. You'd swipe right on someone whose Tinder bio reads, "Healed my own burns, ready to love." Laughter ripples through the audience, a nervous release. After 3 measured breaths, the priest lifts his voice and checks Ibrah's palm. The butter has melted into translucent pools, slipping down his wrist in slow rivulets. A wave of relief washes over the crowd as the verdict echoes. The gods have absolved him. Lanterns bob in celebration. Applause rattles off the walls. And the flames crackle in what feels like triumphant applause. Oddly enough, remnants of such fiery tribunals smoldered in church courts across Europe until the 13th century, when papal edicts began frowning on ordeals in favor of sworn testimony and juries. Medieval bishops insisted that reason and witness statements should eclipse ash and flame. You can almost feel the smoke dissipate as legal minds traded flickering torchlight for ink-stained parchment. Yet the drama didn't vanish. Slingers in festival reenactments and in ghost stories whispered around modern campfires. You step back from the circle, chest still echoing with crackles, skin tingling in the cool night air. A world without. This fiery finale seems a bit less electric, a lot kinder on bare hands, though still tinged by shadowed memory. You stepped from the crackling circle into a vaulted medieval hall where torch flames flicker against rough-hewn oak beams. And the smell shifts from smoky pine to damp stone and worn leather. Your ears pick up the distant drip of water from mossy walls as you trudge barefoot across flagstones that have borne the footsteps of nobles and paupers alike. A hush drapes over the room, punctuated only by the scrape of a guard's chainmail and the low murmur of onlookers. In 816 CE, Charlemagne formally endorsed compurgation and oracular oaths, weaving them into Carolingian law as divine proof in trials for serious crimes. Today, you're about to witness 2 entwined rituals, an oracle's invocation and a blindfolded oath, designed to haul the truth into the light, or at least scare liars into confessing. You're led to a narrow alcove where a simple wooden table holds a small reliquary containing a saint's finger bone. Candles gutter around its edges, casting jittery shadows across walls, painted with saints' faces that seem to lean in, eager for your declaration. A low chant hums through the hall, and you realize it's coming from an unseen choir chamber, above voices tangled like vines. It's barely coherent but strangely hypnotic. The officiant, a gaunt monk with ink-stained fingers, places a silk blindfold over the accused eyes. The fabric is scratchy, smelling faintly of lavender and mildew. You probably remember that rancid butter sent from the fire. Ordeal. This is a completely different kind of stink. Less intense, but just as convincing. The accused, an itinerant tinker named Aldred, steadies himself while oath helpers, usually 12 local men of good repute, gather behind him. They clutch their own relics, a shard of bone, a scrap of cloth believed to be from the Virgin's veil, even a lock from a revered hermit's beard. Each will swear that Aldred's oath is true, backing his word with their honor. If a single helper refuses, Aldred's guilt is assumed. Social peer pressure dressed up in piety. Historians still argue whether such compurgation was meant to elicit divine judgment or simply to exploit communal loyalty for state control. A hush falls as the oracle is summoned. 2 acolytes roll in a large bronze bowl filled with water, rumored in fringe circles to have once held a live carp. They claim that if the fish flipped and twitched when Aldred's hand touches the water despite the blindfold, that's the saint signaling innocence. In some remote alpine villages, they actually used a goose instead of a fish. 3 honks, and you're clean. Silence, and you're nailed. You wonder if the goose ever freaked out, honking all night, and families woke up convinced they'd executed the local baker. It sounds like a prank call, gone religious. Now Aldred raises his right hand, trembling, to dip it into the water. The chill seeps through his sleeve, and you catch a shiver in the torchlight. The surface quivers like quicksilver. And for a moment you swear you hear a faint gurgle. Was that the carp complaining about aquatic blindfolds? You grin, picturing a fish rolling its eyes, thinking, not again. Above the bowl, the monk recites Latin verses, calling on Saint Juliana to bear witness. The syllables slide through the hall, wrapping around your spine so tight you half expect your vertebrae to sing. The onlookers lean forward, its faces half lost in shadow, nails clicking against benches. Aldred's hand submerges fully. Water droplets bead on his brow, and you can almost taste the cool mint scent of the moss lining the bowl. The carp inside, chubby and irate, begins to thrash, as if startled by supernatural waterboarding, and then, oddly, calms. It drifts in lazy circles for 3 slow beats before bumping into the side of the bowl. The crowd exhales together, a collective breath like wind rushing out of a cave. You're momentarily jealous of that fish's zen state. It's the closest anyone here has come to true peace. Next comes the oath itself. Aldred, still blindfolded, raises a finger and pledges on the relic to speak only truth. His voice is unsteady but clear. By this relic and by my name, I swear I have not stolen the noble's silver. Each of the 12 helpers repeats his exact words, one after the other. The pattern builds momentum. Aldred, helper 1, Aldred, helper 2, until it echoes like a liturgical mantra. You secretly admire the efficiency. 12 men echoing one statement is the medieval version of retweeting to boost your online cred. A modern aside flits across your mind. Imagine if Twitter had existed then. #relic pledge trending in Aachen. Then an attendant steps forward with a gilded ladle of water poured from an alabaster urn said to have held water from St. Catherine's Grotto. The officiant drips 3 drops onto the reliquary's lid. The drops stay separate. Innocence is shown. If they merge into one little pool, guilt is presumed. The moisture glistens under torchlight, beads hanging like tiny lanterns before falling. On the 3rd drop, it splits perfectly, utterly neat, no merging. The monk cries, Benedictus, and the hall erupts in relieved applause that rattles window panes. You feel your chest loosen, as though you've been holding your breath underwater. The sense of relief is contagious, like finishing a terrifying roller coaster with a grin plastered on your face. Yet part of you questions the whole spectacle. How many innocent tinkers' hands sat in bowls of sacred water, only to have a helper slip up and doom them? Historians still argue whether such blaze communal rituals truly tapped the divine, or simply amplified social hierarchies dressed in mystic jargon. Aldred withdraws his hand, the water trickling down his sleeve and pooling at his feet. The blindfold is removed. Pale daylight seeps through high windows, cutting swaths of light across cracked flagstones. He squints, nods, and staggers down from the dais, arms raised in modest triumph. Some villagers pat him on the back, so hard you'd think he just won a joust. Others cough stiffly, as though worried their neighbor might have secretly whispered a doubt. You give Aldred a silent thumbs up, though he can't see it thanks to that blindfold. You wander toward the exit, ears still ringing with the clang of the reliquary and the final amen. You recall Ebra's ordeal by fire, the smell of charred butter and molten iron, and realize this ritual feels softer by comparison. Cool water replacing searing coals, communal support replacing solitary terror. Yet both relied on faith in an unseen arbiter. You scrape your elbow on the rough wood of the door jamb as you leave, a mild sting comforting you with its mundanity. A final joke bubbles up. Next time you lose your car keys, maybe dip them in holy water, and have a dozen friends swear you never misplaced them. Could be cheaper than a locksmith. As you step into the courtyard's faint morning light, the echoes of chanting fade behind you. The oracular bowl sits abandoned, like a stage prop after the curtain falls. You glance back once more, wondering if the fish is still drifting serenely or plotting revenge. In your pocket, you find a stray drop of water that must have splashed onto your hand, water that once sat in St. Catherine's urn, now mingling with your sweat. The air tastes fresher out here, breezy, carrying the distant calls of roosters. You realize that even blindfolds, rituals, and relics couldn't fully obscure the human quest for fairness and for spectacle. And as the sun climbs, you trudge on, ready for the next trial, awaiting just over the horizon. You trudge past a half-collapsed gatehouse, the morning sun growing warmer against your shoulders, till you reach a wooden scaffold perched over 3 massive iron cauldrons. Steam coils upward like lazy serpents, carrying scents of scalded herbs and boiled oats. A hush settles, broken only by the sputter of bubbling liquid. You've seen fire ordeals and oath rituals, but this one promises a destined rendezvous with actual boiling water. You're about to plunge your hand into a cauldron to retrieve a small metal ring, a customary test in 12th century England, reformally outlined under Henry II's legal revisions of 1194. The ring, blessed by a priest, serves as your gauge. If your wounds heal cleanly in the next 40 days, you're vindicated. If not, well, let's say your dermatologist would have a field day. Historians still argue whether such ordeals were divinely sanctioned or simply medieval insurance fraud for lawyers. You step up onto the scaffold's planks, rough sawn and sour with dampness. The officiant, squat bearded man in soot-flecked robes, dips his hand into the largest cauldron first, drawing forth a handful of dripping nettle leaves. He claims these will ward off malevolent spirits that might tamper with the outcome of fringe practice once popular in isolated Bavarian villages. You snicker to yourself. Imagine nettles protecting you when you can barely tolerate their sting. In a midnight foraging spree, a gust of wind sniffs around the scaffold, carrying whispers of your last ordeal by waterwell, the fish trick. Anyway, and you recall the carp's zen-like drifting. You wonder if that fish would have thrived here, marveling at a pot of scalding, herb-infused broth. The crowd gathers below, forming a rough horseshoe. Their faces lean in, eager for the show. Some hold stools to sit on, others perch on crates, legs dangling over the edge. A few bold souls bring pocket thermometers, modern interlopers trying to calculate the cauldron's precise temperature. You estimate around 95 degrees Celsius, just shy of volcanic. A local apothecary tries to guess the pH of the water, but the barmaid rolls her eyes and mutters, "We're not brewing your damn tonic." You tip her for sass alone. The bearded officiant raises his voice in a sleepy cadence, calling on St. Wilfrid's intercession. He sprinkles holy water onto the bubbling surface, and for a moment the steam glitters with rainbow prisms, like a kitchen experiment gone mystical. You lean closer, catching the hiss of steam against skin, and feel the hairs on your arms prickling. A joker in the back snorts. "Feels like my mom's ramen bowl when she forgets I'm gluten-free." Laughter ripples through the gathering as the officiant hands you the ring suspended on a leather thong. You grip the thong, dreads grazing your palm, and steel yourself. It's 1 foot forward, you feel the rough edge of the scaffold plank under your shoe. The crowd hushes, as though collectively holding their breath. The officiant nods, and you lower your left hand into the nearest cauldron. Instant heat slaps you like a live wire. Steam billows, momentarily blinding you. Your senses flood with a sharp tang of burnt oats and roasting nettles. Ku gaspa, half laugh, half scream, and the onlookers wince in unison. Your fingertips, numbly brush metal before you pinch the ring between your thumb and forefinger. It's slick, stinging your flesh with a searing whisper of pain in a reflex. You yank your hand out, water cascading down your arm in sizzling rivulets. The audience shuffles, unsettled by the sizzling soundtrack. You bring your hand up onto a coarse towel, the fibers hissing as they meet moisture. The ring swings on its thong, catching the sun like a taunt. You marveled at its simplicity. A cold piece of iron meant to carry all your innocence or guilt. A local healer steps forward to assess your burns. She squints at your reddened skin, murmuring into a notebook about blisters, edema, and the risk of infection. You feel proud of having an amateur dermatologist on standby. She dabs a smear of honey mixed with ground lavender folk remedy, once used in remote Cornish hamlets, said to accelerate healing. You breathe in the floral sweetness and joke to yourself. At least my burns will smell like a spa treatment. Now you'll need to wait the next 40 days to track your healing progress. Officially, if your skin shows only slight redness and no festering, you're absolved. The wound deepens or blisters burst, the ordeal is deemed conclusive proof of guilt. You glance at the cauldrons, empty but for faint swirls of herb residue, and wonder how many innocent bakers and blacksmiths stood here before you. Historians still argue whether these water trials truly reflected divine will or simply applied unbearable pressure to extract confessions. After all, a single misstep, dropping the ring or keeping your hand in too long could damn you. The healer wraps your hand in linen bandages tied with frayed twine. A cheer rises as you step down. Two guards press a small parchment into your free hand your summons for follow-up inspection. You tuck it into your tunic, feeling the crinkle of officialdom. A boy in the crowd tosses you an apple, grinning, "Here, for energy so you don't hydrate with holy water again." You accept it with a dramatic bow, peeling the skin thoughtfully. The first bite is crisp and tart, a mundane luxury after steam and smoke. It's the best post-ordeal snack you've ever had. You shuffle off the scaffold, the heat from the cauldrons, replaced by a cool breeze that sniffs at your singed tunic. Steam still curls from your wrapped hand like a small chimney. Behind you, the cauldron sits silent and ominous, ready for the next candidate. You recall the flicker of flames in Ibra's trial, the silent fishbowl in Aldred's oath, and realize this ordeal is the most visceral, yetro, elemental, and intensely personal. Despite the stinging pain, you can't help but feel a strange thrill. You're part of a centuries-old drama, where water boils and reputations hang in the balance. You wander toward the edge of the platform, apple core in hand, and look back. Once more at the cauldrons. They bubble faintly in the afternoon sun, like witches' brews simmering for some untold purpose. You flex your burned hand gently, marveling at how quickly pain can transmute into pride. A final joke flits to mind. Next time someone tells you to get your hands wet, make sure it's not divine justice they have in mind. With that thought, you step off into the courtyard, heat and steam fading behind you as you move into cooler realms where healing is measured in days, not divine decree. You step off the scaffold's platform and wander along a winding path of cobbles, slick with moss, your bandaged hand throbbing softly with scalded memory. Soon, you arrive at a sprawling meadow enclosed by low earthen ramparts where torches are set like sentinels along a rough-hewn plank leading to a raised dais. The scent of scorched grass and singed wood drifts on a cool breeze, reminding you of the smoking cauldrons and the scent of charred butter from Eberra's fiery ordeal. Today's stage holds a blacksmith's forge, its bellows huffing in a steady rhythm, and beside it, a row of iron bars heating to a glowing orange red. This is the ordeal by red-hot iron in, ancient practice codified in early medieval Frankish laws. where the accused must carry a length of heated iron 3 paces before a cleric inspects the resulting burns you're about to become part of. That history. You climb the dais steps, rough timber creaking beneath your boots. The blacksmith, a mountain of a man with soot-streaked arms, swings a hammer and flattens the heated iron bar on an anvil. Sparks fly like tiny fireflies flickering out of reach. He thrusts the bar toward the officiant, whose sun-faded vestments bear scorch marks from countless trials. The air shudders with heat, warping the view of distant hills into a wavering mirage. A fringe practitioner once claimed that sprinkling crushed jay's feathers into the forged soot would charm the bar, making innocence more likely, though no surviving account confirms it ever worked. You shiver, picturing cackling villagers tossing feathers into the flames like a bizarre barbecue ritual. The officiant lays the bar too cool for a moment, then sears his thumb upon it. He holds his charred flesh aloft and declares, "Behold the proof of sacred neutrality." The smell of burning flesh mingles oddly with the acrid metal scent, an unsettling combination that makes your stomach twist. You're tempted to crack a nervous joke. Guess that's one way to break the ice. The crowd chuckles uneasily, as laughter always feels a bit hollow when flesh is on the line, literally. Your turn arrives. The officiant hands you the iron bar by a leather thong looped around its center. The leather is rough against your palm, smelling like old saddle soap and hot iron. You feel the bar vibrate faintly as it cools from blistering heat, toward a less lethal warmth, though it's still more than enough to sear skin. You recall? The water ordeals, steaming netherworld, and the charcoal glow of Eberra's trial. But this feels more intimate, metal touching flesh. A dance of pain and hope. You take 3 measured paces, each one echoing on the dais boards. With each step, your fingertips brush the iron surface. Heat radiates upward, a wave of fire licking your skin. Pain blooms and then recedes as your nervous system floods with endorphins. You think about posting about this on medieval social media? Just did the hashtag Hot Iron Challenge? No big deal. A modern aside flicks through your mind. You'd probably get banned for reckless behavior. You tried that on Instagram. Arriving at the end of the board, you lift the bar and press it against a white limestone slab held by a jailer. The cold, chalky surface meets the red-hot iron with a hiss and a crack, sending a shower of sparks that drift like embers in an evening breeze. The crowd gasps and then falls silent. You flip the bar around, suspending it for inspection, and the officiant steps forward. He whips off his gloves, tucks his fingers into stained sleeves, tained aloud the number of calluses, blisters, and depth of the burn grooves. His voice is calm, but the gravity in his eyes is unmistakable. As he inspects, a healer steps forward. From the side, carrying a small pot of crushed snail shells mixed with vinegar, fringe remedy believed in some Provençal villages to draw out impurities from burn wounds. You wrinkle your nose nails and vinegar smell like the bottom of a garden, yet the healer insists it speeds recovery. You joke to yourself, nothing like a little escargot-fused antiseptic. A chuckle ripples through witnesses, lightning the mood in an otherwise solemn moment. The officiant steps back and gestures to a scribe in the corner, who unrolls a parchment ledger. The scribe jots down the number of blisters and measures the burn marks with a sharpened reed stylus. You realize this document might outlive you, become a dusty record in a monastery's archive. Historians still argue whether these meticulous records served genuine legal scrutiny or functioned as theater, reinforcing the church's power over flesh and fate. You find it astonishing that something as unpredictable as flesh meeting metal could be subjected to such cold, bureaucratic precision. The verdict hinges on the severity and number of wounds. If your hand shows only superficial redness and minimal blistering, you'll be pronounced innocent. If the bars heat, carved deep grooves and swelling bursts, you'll wear guilt in your scars. The officiant raises his hand, sealing your fate. Your heart thunders like a war drum as the crowd leans in. His voice is soft. By God's grace and saintly intercession, this man bears only the mark of the innocent. A ripple of relief flows through the meadow, carrying away your tension like wind dispersing smoke. You exhale so hard you nearly topple backward. You joke to yourself, "Look at me cleared by saintly barbecuing." The crowd erupts in applause, and torchlight flickers as dusk descends, painting the horizon in bruised purples and deep blues. Your arm aches, but it throbs pleasantly, proof that the flesh was tested and found pure. You've stepped down from the dais, each movement accompanied by supportive hands from villagers eager to congratulate you. Someone presses a small vial of lavender oil into your palm, whispering that it'll soothe the burn. You tuck it into your belt pouch, imagining the scent of purple fields easing your sting. As you walk away, the blacksmith douses the iron bar in a bucket of water, sending a burst of steam skyward. It's the final exhalation of this metal trial, a hissing benediction that signals closure. You glance back at the extinguished forge, remembering the cauldrons and the fishbowl, and feel a curious kinship with all who've passed through these rites. Each texture, the slick metal, the burning heat, the stinging scent of singed leather, becomes a memory etched into your flesh and mind. You step into the gathering twilight, the meadow's ramparts trembling softly as nocturnal creatures stir beyond. Your burned hand throbs again, a heartbeat of remembrance, and you can't resist one last quip, hot enough to teach you honesty, but cool enough to actually keep your hand. Laughter drifts through the darkening air as you trudge onward, carrying the heat and relief of the ordeal with you into the night. You step away from the forge's dying embers into a damp courtyard where the air tastes of wet stone and moss, as though the walls have been weeping for centuries. Lanterns sway overhead, their glow riffling across shallow puddles that trace cracks in the cobblestones. At the far end, a wooden platform looms beside a circular stone well filled with dark, chilly water, a cold water ordeal pit. You probably shivered at the fishbowl and heated iron. Now brace yourself for the plunge into icy justice. In 1220, canon law formally recognized cold water trials in ecclesiastical courts, believing God would bless the innocent with buoyancy and condemn the guilty to a watery grave. A jailer in a sodden cloak stands by the well, hefting a length of rope tied around the accused's waist. The rope's fibers are rough against his hands, smelling faintly of salt and mildew, an aroma that sticks in your nose like an unwelcome reminder you're not poolside. Beside him, a deacon arranges white linen sheets they'll wrap around the condemned after the dunk to inspect for shriveled skin, eel-like wrinkles, or other marks of guilt. Your skin crawls at the thought of pruny fingers being court-admissible evidence, a fringe practice once popular in Swiss alpine hamlets, involved dropping a crucifix into the pit. If it floated, angels bore witness to innocence. You stifling grin, a floating cross. That's one way to pray for buoyancy. Imagine modern lifeguards tossing in a life jacket with a neon buoy, innocent, mid-dunk. You wonder if people back then ever rigged the cross with cork. Historians still argue whether such add-ons corrupted the purity of the test or simply reflected local piety. A hush falls as the accused, a timber merchant named Morel, is led barefoot onto the platform. Her cloak is soaked through, clinging to her arms, and droplets glisten on the hem of her skirt. She wraps her hands around the rope's knot, knuckles white. You catch the scent of cold water rising off the well, mingling with distant wood smoke from the forge. Her breath puffs in the air like mist, keen, the fog coiled drifting across the courtyard. The deacon intones a prayer in Latin, its voice low and soothing. Aqua sancta, lucis lumen, reveal thy truth. His syllables echo off the stone walls, a melody half soothing, half haunting. You feel goosebumps ripple up your arms, recalling the stabbing heat of the iron ordeal and the fish's zen calm. Now your blood runs cold, as though you're about to host a live stream of your own personal ice bucket challenge with eternity at stake. The jailer tightens the rope around Morelle's waist, guiding her to kneel at the platform's edge. Damp wood creaks beneath her knees. You shuffle forward, toes curling around the edge, trying not to catch your foot in a puddle. A faint chorus of frogs croaks from the well, like nature's commentary on the impending dunk. A spectator whispers that the well once contained a drowned donkey. Fringe lore claims its ghost helps sink the guilty. Your mind flicks. Great. Now I'm worried about spectral farm animals. Morelle lifts her skirts just enough to free her ankles, then stands, stepping into the water. The surface breaks with a hush, ripples sliding outward in widening rings. The water's temperature shocks her from ankles to wrists, a biting chill that tightens muscles instantly. You recognize that familiar, breath-stealing sting of cold immersion, like jumping into your hotel pool in January. Her breath hitches, cheeks flushed, as she steadies herself. Without warning, the jailer gives the signal. Two strong arms seize Morelle's rope and plunge her below the surface. Bubbles surge upward, scattering like startled birds. Time stretches each second, a tiny eternity, as you watch her silhouette fade through murky ripples. Your heartbeat thunders, matching the water's dance, until the jailer yanks her back up. She bursts through the surface with a gasp, water cascading from her hair, arms, and skirts. The courtyard exhales collectively. Some onlookers shiver, others rub their arms for warmth. You feel droplets clinging to your eyelashes. Morelle stands in the well up to her waist, chest heaving, eyes wild. The deacon instructs her to rise fully, lifting her skirts above her knees. The water falls off her calves in shimmering sheets. There's a pause long enough for you to imagine a TikTok filter declaring her hashtag guilty or not. Then the jailer hauls her forward and a healer presses the linen around her arms and legs as the sheets absorb the water. They pinch into her skin, causing goosebumps that ripple like miniature mountains. The healer kneels, inspecting for watermarks. Of innocent, supposedly. The innocent would be free of wrinkles, the guilty would bear the telltale shrivel. You lean in to see, but the tension makes you tip your head. Droplets fall in slow motion, and you taste iron on your tongue as water drips past your lips. After a moment, the deacon stamps a small piece of wax into the wet linen. It clings, resisting the damp. If it peels off easily, innocence is declared. If it breaks or stays stubbornly stuck, guilt is pronounced. You suppress a chuckle, a child's Scotch tape test for medieval crimes. He presses the wax and lifts with solemn ceremony. It detaches cleanly, leaving no trace. A low murmur of relief hums through the crowd, like wind rustling through reeds. The deacon pronounces, "By the mercy of the Lord, she floats free of guilt." Some cheer. Others dip their handkerchiefs in the well in celebration. You wrinkle your nose at the brine and mucus aftertaste seeping from their cloths. The jailer helps Morelle out of the pit. Her knees quake as she steps onto the platform. A villager hands her a wrapped loaf of bread for warmth. It's crusty and still warm, the best hospital food you've ever seen. You watch as she wraps the linen around her calves, the cloth drying quickly in the evening breeze. It's the mixture of damp cloth and skin crackles like paper in a fire, ironically, echoing the first ordeal you witnessed. You recall the fish's indifferent drift, the scalding water, the red-hot iron test, to wonder which sensation felt most like truth. This one, you decide, as you breathe in cold night air spiked with damp clay and moss. There's an authenticity in the shock of cold that scalding heat and flickering lights can't replicate. As the crowd disperses, some linger to chat about the spectacle. Was it truly divine intervention, or merely physics and muscle memory? Historians still argue whether buoyancy trials revealed God's will or functioned as excuses to drown the inconvenient. You slip away, grateful your name isn't on the docket, but haunted by the idea of sinking under a chilly surface. Wave laps at your boots, reminding you how water holds both life and judgment. You shiver, pulling your cloak tighter. A vendor calls out, offering hot mulled ale spiced with nutmeg, a fringe remedy believed to ward off waterborne curses. You accept a cup, the steam swirling like ghostly fingers in the lantern light. With each sip, warmth blooms in your chest, easing the chill. You grin at the vendor. This tastes better than drowning feels. Laughter drifts across empty cobbles as you take another gulp. The spiced sweetness, a gentle promise of comfort. You step away from the well. Boots clicking on damp stone, carrying with you the echo of ripples and murmurs. The cold water trial stands as the starkest contrast to glowing embers and boiling cauldrons, an elemental reckoning, where buoyancy meant absolution. As you trudge toward the castle gate, the chatter of departing villagers fades, and a silent breeze carries on the nightsuneasy.com. You catch one last glimpse of Morel, wrapped in her damp linen, walking steady now, buoyed by community and warmth. You tuck the memory away, every shiver and ripple etched into your mind, ready for the next trial beyond the horizon. You step through heavy oak doors into a narrow, candlelit chapel, where the air is thick with the sharp sweetness of incense and the faint Thames of stale bread. Pews line the stone floor, their varnished surfaces worn smooth by generations of knees. And a single beam of twilight filters through a high stained glass window, casting shifting hues of red and blue across dusty flagstones. At the front, a priest stands behind a low wooden table laden with small, round wafers, the very communion hosts meant to reveal the presence of witchcraft. In 11th century France, inquisitors began forcing suspected witches to ingest consecrated bread, believing that divine power would choke the guilty and spare the innocent. Tonight, you're the audience to one such ritual. You trudge down the aisle, toes catching on ancient herringbone tiles, recalling the biting cold of the water pit and the sizzling iron bar. This feels softer, no steam, no flame, but the stakes are equally high. A fringe belief once held that if a wafer turned into a mouse in an accused witch's hand, that signified their pact with dark forces, though no reputable record confirms any rodent runaways. You quietly wonder if the mouse might have made a better escape scene than some of the villagers you've seen faint. The priest places a small golden crucible under a single flickering candle. He picks up a host and touches it to his lips, then dips its edge in holy water. You catch the faint metallic sweetness of the water mingled with the chalky scent of unleavened wheat. He offers it to the accused, a local midwife named Margot, who stands with shoulders squared and lips pressed tight. Margot's hands tremble just slightly, but more from the weight of suspicion than the cold air. You breathe in and taste a trace of old wax from the candle, so the flame itself is breathing out its secrets. The priest intones a blessing in a soft, rhythmic chant, invoking Saint Cyprian's protection. The syllables roll through the chapel, lulling you into a near-dream state even as your pulse quickens. Scholars still argue whether the communion wafer ordeal was truly a test of divine intervention or simply a theatrical scare tactic to enforce conformity. You glance around at villagers clutching lanterns, faces pale in the wavering light, as if the host itself might ignite at any moment. Margot lifts the host with both hands, its surface cool and unnervingly smooth. She brings it to her lips and tilts her head back. The chapel holds its breath. You almost expect a cartoon choking sound effect, a hem, to punctuate the silence. Her eyes roll upward for a fraction of a second, and she bites. A soft crack resonates, followed by the scuff of her teeth against wafer. You catch yourself imagining how this would look on YouTube's hashtag, which test challenge - probably fewer views than unboxing videos, but infinitely more dramatic. She swallows. Nothing happens. Relief ripples through the crowd like a breeze. Some villagers gasp, others suppress grins. Inquisitors behind the priest exchange nods. Margot's innocent. A modern aside flits through your mind. Eating dry rice cakes is easier than these wafer jitters. At least rice cakes don't carry theological baggage. The priest hands Margot a second host, drizzling it in wine this time. The aroma of fermented grapes rises, sweet and heady, like a barista's best sangria latte. If she chokes now, they'll claim her safe passage was a fluke. Margot hesitates, then raises the wine-soaked wafer to her mouth. She chews slowly, a deliberate gesture of trust in divine justice. You feel the sticky sweetness of grape on your tongue, as though you'd sipped from the chalice yourself. The chapel's silence swells so full it seems to press on your eardrums. Her jaw works methodically, and at last she swallows again. No cough, no gasp, just the faint echo of a gulp. A ripple of applause shimmers through the pews. You picture the wafer snapping against teeth, like an anticlimactic snap of a fortune cookie predicting you are not a witch. The priest raises his hands and pronounces Margot free of sorcery under God's grace. He stamps a small piece of parchment with a cross and hands it to her. A medieval certificate of exoneration you wouldn't hang on your fridge, but might frame for bragging rights. But here's the odd thing. The wafers on the table remain untouched, each one a silent witness. You recall Ebra's buttered iron ritual, Aldred's fishbowl, the scalding pot, the searing bar, and chilling dunk. This test feels almost polite. No burns, no bruise, just bread, water, and faith. Yet the psychological edge is sharp. Imagine being denied your morning toast for fear it might mark you as guilty. You lean forward, curious about the leftover hosts. The priest gathers them into his hand and sprinkles a pinch of ashes atop the Tabala fringe custom from remote Welsh hamlets, where they believed the burnt wafer dust could ward off curses. Those ashes hold the scent of charred grain like a campfire after the embers die. You wonder if anyone ever sneezed and claimed the ashes spelled doom. A murmur rises as a skeptical elder steps forward, pointing to a tiny flaw in a wafer's edge. He suggests it collapsed during baking, creating an illusion of the host cracking in the accused's throat. Historians still argue whether errors in unleavened bread preparation fueled false convictions or simply proved the vulnerability of human memory. The priest listens, his face unreadable, then dismisses the concern with a gentle wave. No baking fluke will undo the verdict. Margot gathers her cloak, the linen rustling against stone. Her eyes linger on the chapel shadows, as if expecting them to sweep her back inside. You imagine the ghosts of burned herbs from the water ordeal mingling with the angelic incense here. A sensory tapestry of trial by ordeal across centuries. A child in the back whispers, "Is there communion after party?" And you can't help but smile at the thought of villagers trading wafer crumbs like party favors. You step out of the chapel into the crisp evening air. The smell of damp earth and moss returns, grounding you after the sacral hush. Margot follows, clutching her parchment. A villager hands her a small clay loaf of sweet bread as a token of community relief. She tears off a piece and offers it to you. It's crumb soft, honeyed, unassuming. You take a bite, feeling the simple comfort of shared food. Recognizing that sometimes the plainest bread carries the heaviest weight of belief. You tuck the parchment into your pouch alongside the healer's lavender vial, the priest's wax-stamped certificate, and your own memory of dented, singed flesh and tested faith. You trudge back toward the flickering torchlight of the courtyard, each footstep a soft echo on stone. It's carrying the lingering taste of incense, grape, and the simplest of truths, that faith tastes a lot like bread. You step from the misty courtyard into a low-ceilinged chamber whose dark oak shelves groan under the weight of leather-bound tomes. The air is thick with the warm musk of aged parchment and the faint temps of iron from dozens of tiny metal clasps adorning the covers. You brush your fingertips along a vellum-bound register, crisp edges crackling like distant fire embers as you open it. Sooty lamplight flickers across slanted desks, illuminating scribes hunched over quills, their ink pots stained a deep brown. Half of it spilled onto the desks where stray drops have dried into glossy, beetle-egged beads. Faint, acrid whiff lingers perhaps from iron gall ink or a forgotten ermine pelt pouch rubbed against the grain of the wood. You inhale, tasting a subtle hint of dust and resin, as though the room itself exhales centuries of whispered confessions. A clerk slides a chair to you, its leather cushion creased with use. You sit, feeling the soft give beneath you, and lean in as he points to an entry dated 1216, a year after the Fourth Lateran Council forbade most trials by ordeal. The neat Gothic script reads, "On the 3rd day of March, Brother Alred inscribes the measure and outcome of 3 ordeals, cold water dunk for Brother Morris, water bar carried by Widow Elfrida, and scalding broth for Antonia the Weaver." Each name is flanked by tiny symbols, a fish doodle beside Morris's entry, a stylized iron bar under Elfrida's, and a steaming cauldron marking Antonia's. The clerk says these glyphs helped parish priests skim the registers quickly. You smile at the medieval version of emojis, a fish, an iron bar, a pot, wondering if they ever considered using a thumbs-down symbol for guilty verdicts. A modern mental aside flickers. Maybe they'd have loved animated GIFs. You trace the curling letters and feel the grooves where the scribe's quill pressed deep into the parchment, fingertips pressing into soft clay. Marginal notes in shaky script records, side comments. Witness off on ale verily. K and burn mark oddly resembles small hair beside Elfrida's entry. K, you wonder if a wandering hair ever popped into the forge, distracting the officiant. Fringe tradition held that seeing a hair's reflection in molten iron meant supernatural interference, though no, Sirius Chronicle confirms it. You chuckle, picturing a rabbit yanking off a blacksmith's goggles mid-trial. The clerk leads you to another shelf, where a row of small, sheepskin rolls stands like votive candles. He unrolls one, revealing a cramped table, columns of names, ordeal types, verdicts, and notes on healing progress. "This is the 14th century diocesan variant," he whispers, as though the registers themselves are secrets worth murmuring. One entry shows a curious annotation in red ink, "Wound healed by St. Benedict's mandrake salve." You wrinkle your nose, recalling that odd herb's supposed power to ward off guilt. Picturing villagers searching fields for mystical roots while dodging local farmers. You quip to yourself, at least they didn't rely on snail shell vinegar. This time, you flip to a later page where an outraged scribe scrawled witch in margin letters so large they nearly smudge across 2 columns. Next to it, another hand added, "Ink seeps to freely, beware false scandal." Historians still argue whether such spirited margin notes were genuine corrections or clandestine attempts to skew verdicts in favor of powerful locals. Was the scribe defending a friend, or simply objecting to sloppy penmanship? You imagine a medieval office memo. All scribes, please refrain from personal commentary beyond ink color. Q. A small brass lamp guttering overhead casts dancing shadows that skim across an entry from 1312, listing ordeal by hot iron suspended, replaced with jury trial. Beneath it, someone doodled scales of justice balanced with a torch on one side and a rolled-up parchment on the other. You trace the lines, feeling a shiver of recognition like finding a century-old meme. A modern aside nudges you. Try comparing that to flipping a coin on Twitter polls. You bite back laughter, remembering the solemn hush before each fiery test. Beside the lamp, ink-stained fragment of paper flutters in a draft, detailing a fringe practice from a backwoods English parish. It claims the scribe once wrote false entries using a quill plucked from a raven's wing if discovered. The offending bird would be excommunicated in a bizarre ritual. You raise an eyebrow. Excommunication for a crow? That's one way to enforce record integrity. You imagine medieval ornithologists keeping portfolios of exiled corvids. The clerk guides you to a thick tome labeled Judicial Canons. It's 1,283 inches where canonical law begins to challenge the usefulness of ordeals. It's polished brown leather, creased. Like aged skin, smells faintly of wax where seals once held the pages together. You open it to a passage declaring, "Trials by ordeal shall no longer avail without episcopal dispensation." The text is matter-of-fact, yet you sense an undercurrent of anxiety, church authorities grappling with whether to preserve sacred spectacle or bow to reason. Historians still argue whether this pivot marked the triumph of rational jurisprudence or the church's bid to centralize authority under more controllable terms. You lean back, listening to the soft scratching of quills and the low hum of whispered readings. The lull is almost soporific, like the drone of a distant fan, soothing even as your mind races. You feel as though you're perched on the edge of history, where each parchment sheet represents a life boiled, baptized, or branded in the name of justice. A swirl of candle smoke drifts across your vision, softening the outlines of the room into a warm haze. If you think about the irony, these same registers that documented divine judgment also captured the church's retreat from ordeal. Like a diary of spiritual self-correction, you stretch and the leather-bound volume creaks in protest as you close it. The clerk dims the lamp and ushers you toward a narrow passage. The smell changes subtly, shifting to the cool earthiness of stone walls and moss, the scent of the courtyard seeping back into your senses. As you ascend a flight of steep stairs, you hear a faint echo, a scribe chuckling at a joke from a neighbor, perhaps about misplacing the inkpot again. You smile, appreciating that even in these grave halls, people found room for quiet humor. Back in the courtyard, the night is calm. Lanterns glow softly, and the distant clatter of boots on cobblestone feels friendly. You pat the pouch at your belt where you keep Margot's parchment, the lavender vial, the iron bar's honey-scented salve, and now a loose fragment of register paper pressed between your notes. You tuck the register scrap into your coat, its musty edge peeking out like a bookmark into history. You grit your teeth playfully. Maybe you'll transcribe it later into a spreadsheet, #medieval data merger. You pause by the gatehouse, inhaling the cool night air mingled with burned wood and parchment dust. The memory of soft lamplight, ink-stained desks, and meticulous entries lingers at the back of your mind, reminding you that every trial by ordeal was recorded, contested, and, eventually, questioned. You trudge on toward the next chapter, the weight of those leather tomes balanced in your thoughts, knowing that history often lives in the margins as much as it does in official verdicts. You step off the cloistered path and find yourself on a sun-baked plain dappled with golden grasses. A low wooden platform sits at the center, its edges charred black where ceremonial fires once crackled. Nearby, a circle of devotees beats drums. In slow, trance-like rhythms, the deep thumps resonating through your chest and even tingling at the base of your skull. You probably feel that vibration in your knees, like an unexpected bass drop at a silent disco. Today's scene transports you to southern India, where, for centuries, devotees have walked barefoot across glowing embers to honor deities and prove spiritual purity. Meanwhile, halfway around the globe, in parts of West Africa, traditional courts still administer poison ordeals, called sassywood in Liberia. To ascertain guilt or innocence within local communities, you're about to witness how two cultures use fire and toxins to let the divine, or nature, speak. You trudge closer to the embers, the aroma of smoldering coconut husks curling into the air. The smell is sweet and smoky, like barbecue crossed with a floral incense candle. The platform is littered with charred sandalwood chips, releasing a soft, piney scent underfoot. A fringe belief persists among some villagers that if you whisper your deepest secret into the ashes before stepping, the fire will consume your dishonesty and leave your feet untouched. Bit like shredding your old diary in a bonfire. Stifle a grin. Imagine sneaking out every embarrassing middle school diary entry into hot coals. Historians still argue whether firewalking began as a literal test of faith or evolved from acrobatic festival displays adapted into legal and religious rites. A robed priestess stands at one end of the platform, oiling her feet with a paste of turmeric and clarified butter, an empirical lubricant believed to reduce burns. The yellow paste gleams under the sun, like someone smeared a stick of margarine across her soles. If you recall the rancid butter from Ebra's ordeal by fire, this smells a lot sweeter. Across the field, a masked judge in Liberia prepares a vial of snuff-based poison mixed with toddy palm wine. The concoction, distilled from the bark of the Erythrophleum guinans tree, is deadly if the accused cannot metabolize its toxins. They say it induces violent vomiting, tremors, and sometimes death. A skeptic in your thoughts wonders if an upset stomach from bad cassava could doom an innocent soul. You imagine Yelp reviews for toxic trials, 1-star horrible service. Almost killed me, would not recommend. You trudge onto the platform's edge, toes sinking into warm ash that feels like walking on a beach with a dash of crushed charcoal. The crowd hushes, and the drumming slows to a heartbeat rhythm. The priestess intones a mantra in Tamil, her voice a soft drone that wraps around you in waves, soothing yet charged with anticipation. In some remote Kerala villages, they once added crushed turmeric petals to the embers, convinced the plants' antiseptic powers would ward off infection. You wrinkle your nose. Turmeric in your tea is one thing, but turmeric fire sounds like a spa treatment gone awry. Your pulse syncs with the drum's thump as you prepare to walk 5 steps across the glowing coals. Each stride will carry your weight over 500-degree embers. If you think back to Aldred's fishbowl ordeal, where water almost drowned him in suspense rather than actual chill, and to the sizzling nettles in the scalding broth. This trial feels elemental fire on skin without the barrier of iron or water. You half expect your phone's battery to overheat, which is probably why firewalking videos are so thrilling on social media. They prove you have more than 10% battery life left. You take a deep breath, inhaling the sweet smoky air, and then lift your right foot. The ash crackles beneath your arch, a sound like rice cereal sizzling in milk. You shift your weight and place your foot firmly on the coals. Heat lashes up, but your turmeric butter paste offers a momentary buffer. You focus on the rhythm in your ears, letting the drumming guide your pace. 1 step, 2 steps, the embers hiss softly, as though whispering secrets you can almost understand. You crack a private joke. Do not try this barefoot at home. Kids, keep your fire alarms nearby. The onlookers smile in the corners of their mouths, though most stare in solemn awe. 3, 4, 5. You land on the platform's far edge. Heart pounding, feet surprisingly unscarred. A cheer ripples through the crowd like wind over wheat. A handful of embers cling to the soles of your feet. You lift your foot and flick them off like dandruff. Victorious scent of victory faintly smoky on your skin. The priestess waves her hands, sending cool gusts of air over the coals. And you feel the heat recede like the tide. You marvel at how fire can be both a destroyer and a purifier, depending on the moment. Next, you're guided under a wide canopy where a caretaker offers you a bowl of water infused with lemon and minta. Refreshing antidote for foot sweat and spiritual stress. You sip and feel the tart-sweet liquid slide down your throat, recalling the icy plunge Morel endured at the cold water trial. You might make a meme. Fire walked, water sipped, still alive. The caretaker hands you a leaf-wrapped pouch of rice flour paste to scrub your soles, and the texture is grainy yet soothing. It's like exfoliating scrub at a budget spa. Meanwhile, in Liberia, a tall man wearing a woven raffia skirt stands before a crowd in a shaded grove. The judge recites a prayer to the ancestors, his voice steady over the hum of cicadas. The accused, a smallholder farmer named Kofi, kneels and receives a spoonful of the poisonous snuff wine mixture. His lips purse, and you imagine that taste. A bitter bite of bark, mixed with fermented sugarcane, swallows. The watchers hold their breath. Seconds tick by like centuries. Kofi's face flushes. He wipes his mouth, saliva thick on his lips. He stumbles to his feet, swaying as if caught in a fierce breeze. Gasps, ripple. He vomits violently once, twice drawing the poison from his system. When the trembling finally subsides, the judge pronounces him innocent. His body expelled the toxin, so the gods have spoken. A hush turns into relieved chatter, and Kofi is hoisted onto villagers' shoulders, his cheeks shining with sweat and triumph. A fringe account in an anthropological journal mentions that, in some communities, they belted the judge with the goats. Tale if an innocent died, an odd assignment of blame that chilled your spine. You imagine goats lined up in the courtyard, trembling with judicial responsibility. Might be skip the tail whipping this season. Historians still argue whether African poison ordeals served genuine dispute resolution or simply reinforced clan hierarchies under the guise of divine will. Back on the Indian platform, a priestess invites you to taste a ball of sweet jaggeria sugarcane treat to celebrate your success. The caramelized sweetness melts on your tongue, reminding you of Margot's honeyed wafer and the lavender-scented salve on your burn. You swallow and feel a warm glow settle in your belly, a stark contrast to the ember tingle fading from your soles. You grin. I survived justice by light, now surviving sugar rush. You sit beside the placid figure of Kofi, a few time zones and rituals away, and share sweet jaggery and lemon mint water across centuries of practice. The drumming resumes as dancers in vibrant saris swirl around the embers, and you imagine African drummers back home raising celebratory songs to the sky. Two rites of ordeal, worlds apart, yet both bound by fire, water, and the deep human urge to let something greater than ourselves stand between doubt and truth. You rise, brushing ash from your shoes, and think, next time you face a tough choice, say, ordering pasta or pizza, you'll realize how mild your dilemmas are compared to walking through flames or sipping poison. A final joke flits through your mind. If my credit card fails, can I challenge the machine to a firewalk? At least I'd get a viral video out of it. Laughter spills around you as you trudge toward the edge of the plain, the embers cooling. Behind you, the scent of turmeric butter and coconut husk smoke lingering like a fan's hum after ASMR. You step through a pair of towering oak doors into a vast hall where alabaster columns stretch upward to a vaulted ceiling painted with scenes of justice and divine order. Candles flicker along the stone walls, casting wavering shadows that dance like silent courtiers. A long dais draped in crimson velvet dominates the space, and at its center sits the broad throne of King Henry II. His stern gaze fixed on a parchment laid before him. You trudge down the polished marble floor, each footstep echoing in the hush. As courtiers clad in brocade and chainmail form a semicircle on either side, the air smells of melting wax and roasted barley, mixed with the acrid temps of ink from countless official seals. At the dais's foot, a clerk in a scarlet robe kneels, pressing a silver-gilt quill to vellum. He dips it into a pot of iron gall ingots, sent sharp and metallic hand writes, imprecise, Carolingian, minuscule, by the authority of the crown. Henceforth, trials by hot iron and boiling water shall be held only in royal courts, under the supervision of the crown's justiciar. This edict, known as the Assize of Clarendon of 1166, officially codified ordeal by fire and water as part of England's nascent common law system. It ensured uniform procedures, appointed qualified clerics to oversee the tests, and mandated that verdicts be entered into royal rolls, no more ad hoc rituals in village squares. You feel the weight of centuries in that single flourish of the quill. A herald sounds a soft trumpet, and a royal messenger steps forward, reading the decree aloud. His voice reverberates under the vaults, to deter false accusations and to uphold peace throughout the realm. No freeman shall be subject to an ordeal outside the king's shire court. Murmurs echo around you as listeners nod in acceptance, or perhaps in anxiety. The decree's real power lies not only in its words, but in its promise of the king's protection. Historians still argue whether Henry II's standardization centralized royal power or merely formalized customs already in practice. You recall Aldred's fishbowl oath and Ebra's scorching buttered iron. Now, imagine those ordeals under one standardized system, with official guidelines stamped by the royal seal. The clerk dips his pen again, adding a clause. Those found innocent by divine signs shall receive the king's pardon and restoration of rights. Those found guilty shall suffer penalties according to kingdom statutes. Okay? Modern aside drifts through your mind. It's like today's government rolling out a new privacy policy law. Arcane, but binding, and likely to be ignored by most until controversy arises. A fringe rumor circulates among the crowd that an eccentric noble attempted to bypass the royal edict by using heated eels instead of iron bars, believing the king's seal applied only to solid metals. According to the tale, the eels wriggled free from the accused's grasp, slithering under the dais in a chaotic escape, though no royal chronicle confirms this slippery skirmish. You smirk at the image of angry eels flopping across the marble floor, outrunning outraged clerics. The messenger steps down as a herald proclaims, "Long live the king." Voices join in a muted amen, and the clerk affixes a circular wax seal depicting a reclining lion. Its edges crackle as he presses a signet ring into the molten wax. The scent of heated metal mingles briefly with ink and barley roast. You sense the ritualistic hush of power, how a simple stamp transforms fragile parchment into unassailable law. Beside the throne, a minister unfurls a map of English shires, each marked with a tiny iron bar icon representing authorized ordeal sites. You trace a finger along the coast, from Kent to Cornwall, noting where royal justices will preside. Those iron bar symbols echo the doodles you saw in Dusty Register's medieval emojis, elevated to official cartography. You wonder if the justices kept pocket thermometers to measure the water's temperature, okay? Or if they eyeballed the coal's glow like artisanal grill masters. The king stands and strides down the steps, his cloak trailing behind him. You catch? The scent of freshly groomed fur on his shoulders, sermon perhaps juxtaposed sharply with the smoke's tang. He addresses the assembly. Let no man doubt that justice flows from God through the crown. May these ordeals reveal truth, uphold peace, and bind all free men to honest judgment. His voice rolls like distant thunder. You feel it resonate in your chest. In that moment, you realize that the edict serves a dual purpose: to harness divine arbitration for royal prestige and to curtail local lords who once commanded their own trials. A courtier leans close and whispers that, in Normandy, Henry II's father, Geoffrey Plantagenet, already enforced similar measures decades earlier, streamlining the ducal courts. It's a mainstream detail you half remember studying in 1150. The Duke of Normandy issued capitularies ensuring ordeals conformed to ducal standards, foreshadowing his son's English reforms. The lineage underscores how these edicts traveled across the Channel, blending Norman and Anglo-Saxon legal traditions. A breeze drifts through an open window, carrying the faint clang of blacksmith hammers from a distant forge and the distant murmur of a bustling market. It feels symbolic. The world outside moves on, yet inside this hall, time stands still as law is reshaped by royal decree. You sniff stairs a faint hint of rosewater from posies arranged at the dais's base. The sweet notes soften the austere atmosphere like digital UI themes easing legal jargon on a website. It's odd, this floral counterpoint to the pungent swirl of ink and metal. As you step away from the dais, it's glancing at the sealed parchment now rolled and tied with crimson ribbon. You pass a sculpted relief of King Alfred the Great meting out. Justice, a king who, centuries before, had integrated trial by ordeal into his own codes. You feel the continuum, from Alfred's 9th century legal reforms to Charlemagne's capitularies. Through the Norman dukes, it's culminating here under Henry II. The hall itself seems to breathe with layers of jurisprudence. You tuck a whispered joke to yourself. If only the king had added a clause for thigh-high flame-resistant boots would save a few singed elbows. Laughter ripples through your mind, though you keep your voice hushed. This is a chamber where even a giggle might echo for years. Before exiting, you pause to watch a minor noble approach the clerk with a small box. Inside is said to lie a fragment of St. Edward's ring, rumored in fringe circles to bless the bearer's ordeal with swift healing. The clerk examines the relic, frowns, and quietly rejects each royal decrees require no additional holy paraphernalia. You admire the bureaucratic zeal. Even divine fragments must clear official channels. Historians still argue whether such strictures stripped ritual of its spiritual essence, or protected the innocent from local superstitions. You step back through the oak doors into a corridor lit by sconces, flames dancing in copper holders shaped like griffins. The scent of barley roast recedes, replaced by the cool earthiness of damp stone. Your boots click along the flagstones, a rhythmic punctuation as you move to the next trial awaiting beyond the castle walls. In your hand, you feel the rolled parchment's wet, a reminder that justice, once spontaneous and smoky, has been harnessed by monarchy for order's sake. You trudge toward the courtyard exit, recalling Ibera's searing iron, Aldred's fishbowl, Morel's icy dunk, and Margot's holy wafers. Now, as dusk falls, you carry with you the echo of royal authority codifying the very ordeals you faced, a king's quill transforming chaos into law, fear into spectacle, and ritual into statute. You step into the night air and shiver, tasting the future of justice unfolding like sealed parchment, still waiting to be unrolled. You step into a high-ceilinged room warmed by dozens of oil lamps. Their flickering reflections dancing off rows of dark oak shelves lined with glass retorts and copper coils. The air smells of burnt grease and metal shavings, a callback to seared iron bars and melting butter in Ebra's trial. A low murmur ripples through the assembled crowd of gentlemen in powdered wigs and ladies fanning themselves with embroidered fans. You've arrived at the Royal Society's annual debunking superstition presentation circa 1764, where leading thinkers gathered to dismantle archaic rituals through hands-on experiments. At the front, Cesa Beccaria's newly translated Treatise on Crimes and Punishments lies open on a walnut lectern its pages, proclaiming that torture and irrational ordeals should vanish from enlightened codes. Beccaria argues that justice must rest on evidence, not divine whim. You feel a surge of camaraderie with that ideal, remembering Morel's icy dunk and Margot's wafer now replaced by cold logic and measured proof. Historians still argue whether Beccaria's plea for rational justice sparked courtroom reforms or merely emboldened aristocrats to extend state power. The presenter, Dr. Richard Meade's protege, strides forward, wearing a soot-streaked apron. He picks up a red-hot iron bar plucked from a portable forge across the room. It glows ember red in the lamplight, sizzling faintly. You brace for the familiar hiss of molten fat, but instead he smooths the bar with pig lard. The grease smears. Into the metals pours, and the scent that rises is oddly sweet-savory, like bacon on Grandma's Sunday morn. A volunteer from the audience, a portly apothecary's son, volunteers to press his palm against the oiled bar. You probably wouldn't survive this swipe test on Tinder, but live demos are different, with a collective gasp from the audience. The lad presses his hand and holds it there for 3 measured seconds. The lard crackles softly, insulating his skin. He withdraws his hand unscathed, save for a light pink flush. A murmur grows, miracle, devilish grease. Then Dr. Meade, as protege, lifts a magnifying glass to reveal only superficial redness. He announces that the protective layer reduced heat transfer by nearly 60%, no divine spark required. The crowd leans in like spectators at a carnival game. Someone mutters that rigging the challenge makes it less fun, but way more scientific. Next comes the boiling water ordeal. Glass basin of water simmers on a tripod, tiny bubbles dancing like restless spirits. The lecturer dips a metal ring, blessed by a local curate, into the water, then swiftly retrieves it. Under a magnifier, it shows only minor scale incrustation. He recounts how, in 1228, Emperor Frederick II formally banned water ordeals after blunt experiments revealed inconsistent buoyancy outcomes. Some accused sank simply because they'd swallowed air. Others floated thanks to wool-laden clothing. That medieval edict marks the early crack in the ordeal's foundation. Historians still argue whether Frederick's ban was driven by genuine disbelief in divine intervention or his desire to centralize judicial authority. A fringe pamphlet circulates at the back of the hall, claiming that devout villagers once coated their tunics in goose fat to manipulate buoyancy tests. You imagine waddling into a dunking pool, feathers flapping, and snort a laugh goose-powered exoneration. The speaker shrugs off the rumor with a smile and invites 2 guinea pigs, actual rodents, into the ring. He dips them, demonstrating that small creatures, lacking heavy bones, float more easily. The rodents squeak and astound, becoming instant stars on the hall's social circuit. Hashtag float like APIGGIF, trending in London. The final demonstration tests the butter-melting ordeal once common in Normandy, dabbing rancid dairy onto a heated blade. The lecturer holds up a tarnished knifesmith's replica and teases, "Let's see if the gods fancy a refined Gracile parchment or a lump of Lotharingian butter." The audience snickers, but he spreads a dollop of butter on the blades. Handle, he invites a stern judge in robes to grasp it. The judge's grip tightens as the butter melts. He pulls back, revealing a shallow smear on his glove no burn. It's evidence that the butter's melting point, not divine will. Decided guilt or innocence. You taste a faint sourness in the air, like overripened cheese left too long in a damp cellar, another callback to the rancid butter used on Ebra's palm. You choke back a joking comment about artisanal mislabeling. This butter is less cultured than these gentlemen. 3 polite guffaws ripple through, breaking the scholarly tension by now. The lecturer has assembled notes in an iron-bound ledger, temperature readings, heat transfer coefficients, healing rate statistics. He cites a mainstream fact. In 1691, Robert Boyle's experiments with vacuum pumps established the scientific method's primacy, setting a precedent for empirical inquiry over superstition. You recall Boyle's air pump demonstration, complete with barometric readings and vacuum bell jars, proof that nature follows discoverable laws, not divine theatrics. Now, calls for a volunteer to reenact Margot's wafer test, but with plain crackers and unblessed water. The chosen lady sips lavender-infused tea instead of wine, munches a cracker, and experiences no choking. The lecturer points out that texture, dryness, and the subject's swallowing reflex play far greater roles than holy sanction, a fringe. Note in his lecture, Materials mentions that some midwives once dusted wafers with belladonna, powder to induce coffin illicit trick for witch hunters. You shudder, imagining a midwife's covert poison baking class. The lecturer surveys the room and closes with a solemn invitation. Justice built on magic is justice built on sand. Let us replace ordeal with observation, confession with corroboration. Light applause swells, but you catch whispers questioning whether this intellectual parade truly liberated the common folk, or simply transferred judicial spectacle from church squares to genteel salons. Historians still argue whether Enlightenment critiques of ordeal dismantled superstition or served as tools for new elites to assert power under the guise of reason. As you step away from the table strewn with oiled rags, glass basins, and melted butter, each a memento of bygone ordeals, you feel the thrum of progress in your fingertips, tingling like a residual static from a Leyden jar. The lecture hall's wooden floorboards sigh beneath your boots, and the lingering scent of grease, metal, and parchment clings to your cloak. You smile at the memory of the scalding cauldrons, the frozen pit, the searing iron, and the wafer's silent gray sand. Wonder how future generations will dub our own ritual follies. Before you exit, want to pause by a corner table where an amateur chemist offers vials of iron oxide, pigment, and lard, inviting passers-by to mix their own ordeal insulation salve as a souvenir. You pocket a small sample, maybe a future YouTube unboxing awaits. Today, we test medieval remedy with modern data logger. A final internal quip surfaces. Next time someone tells you to feel the burn, remind them it's probably just grease and science. You step into the cool night air, the lamplit hall receding behind you, carrying with you the electric thrill of observing superstition meet empirical fire, and watching faith burn away under the cool gaze of reason. You trudge across a fog-laced causeway toward the riverbank where wooden stakes form a crude pen, and the air smells of damp earth, rotten leaves, and river scum. Lanterns perched on posts cast trembling halos on mud-slick cobbles at the pens. Center, a chair with iron hoops and leather straps sits on a plank extending over slow-moving water. You remember Morel's cold water dunk? But this feels grimmer. This is the ducking stool, the notorious ordeal used well into the 17th century to test witches by immersion. In 1645, under the Witchcraft Act, English justices still sanctioned dunking stools in local parish courts, justifying them as punishment and proof of guilt rather than genuine divine tests. Tonight, you're back for the infamous case of Catherine Moring, the last witch of Pendle Marsh, whose trial became a scandal that finally turned public opinion. Against such ordeals, you step over fallen boards and feel the slick slip beneath your boot. Mud squishes between your toes, offering a grounding reminder. Nothing mystical here, just waterlogged earth and human cruelty. The spectators press in, lantern light bouncing off anxious faces. You recall Ebra's scalding iron, Aldred's carp bowl, and Margot's wafer. This is the most visceral yet, a spectacle of humiliation and fear. A fringe tradition once held that villagers rubbed toads over suspects' legs beforehand, to skin seal the witch's powers, believing the amphibian slime would block divine protection. You shiver at the thought. Imagine squeezing a frog, then dunking in the Thames talk. It's about amphibious justice. Catherine Moring, gray-haired and wiry, is manacled to the stool's arms. Her skirts are wet, mud-spattered, and her face is pale, but resolute. A guard tightens the leather straps across her waist and thighs with a harsh tug, the buckles clinking like distant cowbells. You catch the metallic echo, reminding you of the Iron Bars lecture in the Royal Society Hall. Historians still argue whether ducking stools were genuine attempts to reveal witchcraft or simply excuses for public humiliation and scapegoating. A jailer jerks the stool into motion, sliding it a few feet before tipping Catherine over the edge. Water laps her skirts, then rises past her waist. A muffled cry escapes her as the straps bite into her hips. Knees buckle beneath the leather's pressure, and bubbles roar up as she sinks. You count 1, 2, 3, 4 until she disappears beneath the murky surface. The crowd leans forward, eyes wide, breath suspended. A stray breeze carries a whiff of algae and fish like Aldred's carp bowl, but fouler, as though the river itself resents this cruelty. After a stifled eternity, the stool tilts back. Catherine's head breaks the surface, hair plastered to her cheeks, lips blue. Water drips from her eyelashes in slow beads, and you watch her shoulders heave in a gasping inhale. A spectator offers a handkerchief, its fabric soaked in brine and tobacco spit. You step closer to catch the scent, a rough blend of nicotine and salt. Nothing sacred. The jailer swings the stool back onto the plank. Catherine's legs clear the water as she's drawn ashore. A healer kneels beside her, pressing cloths soaked in warmed ale and rosemary onto her Limsan old folk remedy from remote Cornish. Hamlet said to soothe shock-induced cramps. You wrinkle your nose, aerate of rosemary and stale beer. Hardly a gourmet spa treatment. She removes the leather straps, wincing at each buckle's release. And you notice shallow rug burns on her hips, evidence that the ordeal left marks regardless of divine verdict. The deacon assigned to the trial steps forward, holding aloft a small wooden cross. He pronounces, "If she be innocent, let her sink. If guilty, let her float." You recall the hydrodynamics lecture in that Enlightenment salon demonstrating how heavy clothing traps air, while dense hair and narrow limbs force sinking. Historians still argue whether such flaws made the ducking stool a reliable test or just a lottery of survival. A second dunk is ordered. Catherine stiffens, eyes blazing with fury. She leans forward and is lowered again, shoulders brushing the water's glassy surface before the guard pulls the stool back. You see her toes break the reflection. Then the stool tilts, and she vanishes once more. This time, she fights beneath the river, hands thrashing, skirt ballooning like a jellyfish. You flinch a reflex from that scalding broth ordeal end. Imagine the sharp shock of cold mingled with terror. Up she comes, sputtering and trembling. You count for bubbles this time, but who's counting? Her shivering body convulses as she clings to the plank's edge. The deacon orders a third dunk final chance for divine judgment. Someone in the crowd mutters, "Better hope you don't." Need to file that scroll? A grim pun on the royal edict's mandates. Laughter tastes as bitter as the brackish water. On the third submersion, Catherine's form slips out of view again. But when she resurfaces, she floats longer limbs slack, skirt billowing like a sail. The crowd gasps. Floating equals innocence, by their logic, but she already nearly drowned. The deacon steps forward and lifts his voice. "Behold, the Lord has sustained her." No, which is she? A ripple of uneasy applause begins, mingled with coughs and shifting feet. You notice the parish clerk recording the event in a damp ledger, ink blurring where water droplets splash the page. The script reads, "Mooring, 3 drowns, floats, final innocent. Restored to rights." You recall the registers in that scriptorium, the little fish doodles and iron bar icons. Here, a simple tick mark beside her name. Yet the blunt relief in the crowd feels more like pity than triumph. No cheers. Just hushed, exhalations. Catherine is helped upright. Spectators hold cloaks to block the cold breeze before she waddles to the riverbank's edge. An elderly woman presses a linen shift under her arms for warmth, mumbling about Lord's will and merciful reprieve. You sniff the damp fabric, linen, mold, and a faint trace of lavender from earlier herbal baths. A gentle aside crosses your mind. Next time you're cold, try dunking in the Thames. The healer offers Catherine a wooden mug of hot mead spiked with ginger and antiseptic tonic from Anglo-Saxon remedy lists. You sip from a nearby cup and taste the sweet burn of honey and spice, a comforting counterpoint to the ordeal's brutality. Catherine closes her eyes, letting the warmth spread through her chest. And for a moment, the world feels lenient. Yet, the trial's echo lingers. The crowd disperses in uneasy clusters, whispering about her narrow escape. Some grumble that the ordeal squandered public funds. Others whisper that she bribed a guard to loosen her straps. A fringe rumor flits by. Locals say Catherine once befriended a talking raven that told her secrets. You roll your eyes. If a crow spilled tea, that's scandal enough without dunking chairs as you step away. The ducking stool sits abandoned, its iron hoops darkening under the moon's glow. The mud around it churns into a slurry of injustice and relief. Do you recall how this case sparked outrage in London? Where pamphleteers decried the ordeal as barbarous, and in 1656, the Privy Council quietly forbade dunking stools for witchcraft allegations. The Witchcraft Act of 1735 then repealed earlier statutes, effectively ending the legal standing of all trials by ordeal in Britain. That act, which redefined witchcraft as fraudulent rather than diabolical, marks the final nail in Ordeals' coffin. You trudge back across the muddied causeway, boots slapping in shallow water. The river's murmur seems gentler now, like a mother soothing a frightened child. You shiver as you pass a rotting boat, its oars still attached an ironic remnant of waterborne judgment. You pocket a scrap of damp parchment blown from the clerk's notebook, the words smudged but legible. Last dunking, Pendle Marsh. 1652. You breathe in the crisp night air, tasting peat smoke from distant hearths and the faint temps of mead on your lips. The ordeal's final stand feels less triumphant than tragic a ceremony where innocence meant near death. You admire Catherine's resilience, and as you walk away, you joke to yourself, "Next time I'm accused, I'll just swim away problem." Solved. Laughter drifts through the empty causeway like a whispered benediction. You step into a lab that smells of rubbing alcohol and polished stainless steel, the soft hum of fume hoods whispering through the air like distant chanting. Under bright LED lights, A fingerprint scanner glints beside rows of labeled specimen jars and a sleek DNA sequencer humming with green status lights that could hardly feel more removed from the crackling embers. Steaming cauldrons and murky dunking wells you've endured yet here, in modern forensic science, ancient echoes still reverberate in surprising ways. You approach a workstation where a technician analyzes a fingerprint lifted from a wine glass. He explains that in 1892, Sir Francis Galton published the first systematic study of fingerprint individuality, laying the groundwork for fingerprint identification in courts worldwide by the early 20th century. Okay? A mainstream fact that feels positively miraculous when you recall Ibra's fire ordeal, where divine wounds spoke truth. Ridge patterns do the talking, and no flames are required. You breathe in, catching a faint temps of printer toner soothing in its neutrality, compared to the acrid sting of burnt butter. Nearby, a forensic entomologist gently lifts a pinned blowfly, its tiny legs twitching against the glass pin. She explains that insect activity on bodies can pinpoint time of death to within hours. You recall the carp in Aldrid's blindfolded oath and Morell's icy dunk tests riddled with superstition. Now, flies do the judging, their life cycles mapped like clockwork. A fringe tidbit flashes in your mind, in some rural cold case reinvestigations. Investigators once consulted mushroom growth on skull fragments to estimate post-mortem intervals, believing fungal patterns offered supernatural insight. You stifle a laugh. CSI Fungo, a forensic spin-off never greenlit by network executives. Your gaze drifts to a vial holding a swab of DNA sample. The technician highlights the watershed moment of 1984, when Sir Alec Jeffreys pioneered DNA fingerprinting, forever changing how courts weigh biological evidence. It's tempting to imagine an accused blacksmith brandishing a piece of the royal hair or a scrap of marshland parchment, while today, a blood drop on a cotton swab speaks volumes. Historians still argue whether forensic breakthroughs represent genuine justice or erect a new, more impersonal barrier between facts and the human stories behind them. You run a finger along a polished counter and taste a hint of lingering ethanol. It's clinically clean, lacking the warmth of honeyed salves and lavender bombs once smeared on burn marks. You feel a tingle on your skin, a reminder of flames licking at your palm or nettle-infused broth stinging your flesh. Here, instead of measuring the depth of a scorch groove, techs measure cycle thresholds in PCR tubes to amplify genetic material from crime scenes. Precision has replaced pain. A lie detector machine in the corner sits ready, wires coiled like sleeping snakes. You recall the priest's oaths, the relics, the goose-honking tests meant to throttle the pulse of deceit. The polygraph measures heart rate, blood pressure, and galvanic skin response as you answer a few baseline questions. The operator smiles. No burning irons today. Promise. You imagine calibrating your palms to mimic calm and flustered states, turning the ordeal into a strategic poker game. A modern aside flits through. If only medieval suspects had wearable heart monitors, they might have fooled the faithful all the way through their water drowns. On a nearby screen, 3D reconstruction flickers into view. Laser scanners have mapped the charred remains from a 16th century shipwreck, revealing burn patterns that match accounts of scalding broth tests. The forensic artist overlays historical illustrations of cauldrons and iron bars, aligning scorch marks with eyewitness testimonies. You recall the fish that drifted serenely while oaths were sworn in Europe's churches, and you marvel at how technology bridges centuries. Yet the spectacle remains. Bodies and objects bearing silent testimony to human belief in divine arbitration. A row of glass-fronted cabinets holds replicas of medieval torture and ordeal instruments, iron bars, wicker chairs, wooden scalding pots. You eye the chaise-like ducking stool critiqued in Pendlemarsh. Its leather straps replaced by modern seatbelts in crash tests. A fringe display note claims an experimental theater troupe once staged a reenactment, inviting actors to wear wearable thermocouples during firewalk rituals to record exact heat flux. They found feet reached blistering thresholds in under 2 seconds. You picture the actors hopping off stage, souvenirs of second-degree burns and an all-you-can-eat back buffet. The lead forensic scientist invites you to examine a replica of the red-hot iron ordeal under a thermal imaging camera. You hold a metal bar heated to a safe, lukewarm temperature. It glows only faintly, like a dying ember. The camera's display shows your hand's heat signature spreading across the bar's surface in vivid orange swaths. Then, cooling in milliseconds, you recall carrying that searing iron 3 paces, pounding into limestone for inspection. Now, heat flux maps quantify pain in joules per square centimeter. Science has subsumed suffering. You move to a demonstration of ballistic testing. A ballistic gel mannequin stands before an array of firearms, reminding you that in modern courts, projectiles serve as ordeals of a different sort. Gunshot residue analysis, bullet trajectory reconstructions, evidence once impossible to measure. You think back to butter-melting trials. The melting point of dairy dictated innocence. Today, rifling impressions on a bullet link it irrevocably to a weapon. No divine will needed. Just rifled barrels and meticulous databases. The final exhibit is a slender lie detection helmet that uses EEG readings to detect neural patterns associated with deception. You picture medieval priests hammering bones into altars while chanting to elicit truth. Now electrodes adhere to your scalp, reading electrical impulses. The technician jokes, "If your brainwaves look too calm, we might suspect you're a witch too." You laugh, but feel a flutter in your chest as the sensors tickle your temple's modern ordeal by electricity dot all around you. The lab hums with quiet confidence. Yet you sense that beneath the sterile surfaces, the human longing for certainty persists, whether through flames, water, sharpened irons, or molecular analysis. People have sought signs from outside themselves to adjudicate truth. Historians still argue whether forensic science frees us from superstition or simply reshapes how power asserts itself over bodies and narratives. You step back, letting the LED glow fade across your vision and breathe in deeply. The scent of clean plastic, warm metal, and faint ozone surrounds you, a distinct contrast to the resin, moss, and burning pine you once knew. But the core impulse remains unchanged, a desire for clear, unarguable evidence. You smile and quip softly to yourself. If only medieval villagers had this gizmo, they'd have skipped the toads and the tubes. A gentle laugh echoes in your ears, as calm as the enveloping ASMR drone of lab fans. As you turn toward the exit, you glimpse a poster titled, "From Ordeal to Evidence: The Journey of Justice." Its timeline stretching from Babylon's fire rites through medieval dunking stools to modern DNA databases. You touch the final date, 2012. The introduction of large-scale forensic genetic genealogy, solving cold cases, and feel a thrill. Tomorrow's tech will look just as magical to us as acid-etched, steely, and boiling pots once did. You step out into a cool corridor lit by recessed panels, the quiet hum of instruments fading behind you. The lab's door closes with a gentle click, sealing away centuries of human attempts to extract truth from flesh and faith. You walk on, the modern and the medieval entwined in your mind like ribbons, carrying the lessons of both into whatever trial awaits next. You step into a hushed seminar room lined with leather-bound volumes and illuminated maps, their parchment surfaces crackling faintly under the lamplight. A semicircle of plush chairs enfolds a polished oak table where scholars in tweed jackets murmur among themselves, sipping chamomile tea from chipped porcelain cups. The aroma of dried lavender mingles with musty paper. It's a calming counterpoint to the world of searing irons and icy dunks you've traversed. Tonight's gathering is a roundtable on the legacy of trial by ordeal. And you've snagged a seat to eavesdrop on how experts still grapple with the question, did ordeals propel legal evolution or simply perpetuate superstition? A tater. Silver-haired professor of medieval opens with a mainstream fact. By the 13th century, Pope Innocent III officially curtailed most ordeals, privileging witness testimony and sworn oaths instead. This papal directive reshaped European courts, nudging them toward reasoned inquiry over divine spectacle. You recall the papal edict that ended Ebra's fire trials and replaced the fish bowl in Aldred's oath with jury's ecclesiastical pivot that echoes in your musings. Historians still argue whether Innocent's ban signaled a genuine triumph of rational jurisprudence or a power play by the Church to monopolize truth-making. On your left, a legal anthropologist stirs honey into tea and cites a quirky tidbit. Some late medieval villages held mock ordeals as festival games, where children brandished wooden irons and splashed each other with warm broth, reenacting adult trials for amusement. These carnival rites blurred lines between solemn practice and folk spectacle, suggesting popular attitudes toward ordeals were far from uniformly reverent. You grin, picturing children chanting, "Boil it, don't spoil it," quote, while racing to dunk toy rings in neighbor's soup. It's oddly comforting, like realizing that ancient societies enjoyed, Halloween pranks as much as you do. The panelist on your right, a conservator of judicial manuscripts, leans forward, tapping a slender feather quill against the table. She notes that legal codes in England and France incorporated ordeal regulations not only to adjudicate, guilt, but to standardize punishments across diverse regions. By codifying temperatures for water ordeals and measuring red-hot iron weights, rulers sought uniformity in punishment severity. You think of Henry II's Assize of Clarendon, the royal map of iron bar icons, a gleaming seal that transformed local spectacle into national policy. Yet some register entries smudged by damp bore witness to officials bending rules, reminding us that human caprice often undercut legal precision. Historians still argue whether standardized ordeals fostered fairness or merely institutionalized cruelty under the veneer of equality. A historian of comparative law clears his throat and introduces a fringe debate. In certain Eastern Orthodox regions, clerics secretly administered ordeals using consecrated oil instead of water or iron, an esoteric variant preserved in clandestine monastic chronicles. This clandestine oil ordeal supposedly left no physical mark, testing only spiritual heat. Few credible records survive, but the rumor persists, fuel for scholars skeptical of a neat linear shift from ordeal to evidence. You lean in, imagining monks gathered in candlelit vaults, anointing suspects' foreheads, and watching for invisible scorch patterns. If only a thermal camera had been around to settle that dispute. The panel shifts to the implications for modern justice. One professor cautions that celebrating the demise of ordeals risks ignoring how contemporary systems still deploy ritualized procedures, gavel banging, perjurers' oaths on sacred texts, uniform dress codes to convey authority and extract compliance. He cites a mainstream case. In 1988, a U.S. district court required courtroom interpreters to rise, remove headscarves, and swear on the Bible, even if they didn't identify as Christian. You remember the way priests recited Latin over Margot's wafer, forcing uniform rituals on diverse believers. Historians still argue whether replacing ordeals with codified ceremonies truly liberated individuals or simply recast performative power in secular garb. A sociologist pipes up, positing a quirky tidbit. Some modern police departments use shock collars on suspect animals, electroshock devices, controlling canine behavior, raising ethical debates about inflicting pain for alleged wrongdoing prevention. It's not a direct legal ordeal, yet it mirrors the logic of inflicting calibrated pain to guarantee obedience. You stifle a laugh, imagining medieval beasts strapped to iron bars for sins of livestock theft. But you recognize the unsettling continuity, administering pain, testing for truth or compliance, and defining legal boundaries through bodily coercion. Historians still argue whether such comparisons trivialize ordeals or illuminate their enduring undercurrents. The moderator steers the conversation toward legal pluralism. She notes that in many African and indigenous American communities, customary dispute resolution still incorporates symbolic ordeals, walking the truth path barefoot, providing gifts to ancestors, or reciting genealogies under oath blended with state courts. If you recall India's firewalking and Liberia's sassywood poison rituals, legal anthropologists still debate whether these hybrid systems invigorate local agency or undermine universal human rights norms. You sip your tea, the sweet chamomile smoothing your nerves after the rush of flame and ice. A theology scholar joins in, reflecting on the moral dimension. She argues that ordeals embodied a theological worldview where divine justice was immediate and tangible, binding social order by invoking shared belief. Replacing ordeals with institutional trials severed that direct link to the sacred but invited. Skepticism, leaving a void some populist movements now fill with ritualized spectacles, public executions on social media, televised pleas for verdicts, viral court of public opinion trials. You picture a YouTube live stream of a mock poisoning test. Viewers earn badges for predicting innocence or guilt. Historians still argue whether the legacy of ordeal survives in modern outrage culture. At the table's center, a stack of vellum-bound diaries open like reluctant confessions. The entries trace personal accounts, a woman's terror before the water ordeal, a blacksmith's pride after iron tests, a midwife's trembling hand over a wafer. These first-hand narratives remind you of the human cost behind statutes and sermons. In a hushed tone, a panelist quotes one anonymous memoir, "I feared fire more than death itself. Yet life's sentence seemed kinder than false guilt." The room falls, quiet, no stale jokes can dispel that ache. You touch your bandaged hand where you carried the scalding ring, and recall the sting eased only by lavender salve. The discussion winds toward unresolved questions. Can societies ever fully extricate justice from spectacle? Do remnants of ordeal logic persist in plea bargains? Take the deal or face the trial by jury, where defendants negotiate safety through measured concession. Psychologists still argue whether plea systems are the modern equivalent of plea, of colluding helpers and compurgation, pressuring individuals to confess. You bite your lip, pondering how history's rituals echo in today's courtrooms, where the accused still navigate power dynamics and moral theater. As the seminar draws to a close, the moderator invites final reflections. You glance around at faces illuminated by lamp glow, no coat of iron, no freezing well. Yet each participant carries an inherited fascination with signs and symbols of truth. The professor exhales softly, understanding ordeals roll in. History helps us recognize the thin line between redemptive ritual and coercive performance. You nod, the lavender-scented air settling in your lungs like a promise. You stand and gather your note sketches of iron bars, fish icons, watermarks, flame motifs, each a fragment of humanity's quest for justice. You recall the carp's indifference, the ducking stool's cruelty, turmeric-lubricated firewalk, and the modern lab's sterile resolve. All these trials merge in your mind, a tapestry of pain, faith, and reason. As you step into the corridors, soft glow, the lavender and parchment scents fade. Leaving a quiet resonance, justice always dances between the tangible and the transcendent. And the debate over Ordeals' legacy may never fully settle. You trudge along a narrow forest path where moss-clad stones line your feet, and the air is thick with damp pine and the sweet decay of fallen leaves. Somewhere off to your left, a distant drumbeat thumps, like a heart still faintly pulsing from ages past. Here, in a remote Breton village, an annual feast of the charred oak reenacts a fragment of the medieval fire ordeal. Villagers parade a scorched tree stump through the streets, claiming its blackened bark once bore witness to a trial. By embers, the scent of smoked oak curls around you, mingling with forest resin. As you recall the hiss of Abira's buttered iron and the crackle of your feet on coconut husk embers, historians still argue whether such modern festivals honor ancestral heritage or simply romanticize judicial violence under the guise of communal celebration. You step into the village square, where wooden stalls display miniature iron bars tied, with ribbon souvenirs of ritualized pain sold alongside honeymead and tricolor crepes. One stall-keeper, a weathered woman in a soot-stained apron, invites you to touch a replica bar warmed by a hidden heater, claiming it brings good luck for truthful speech. You gingerly brush your fingertips over the cool metal, flicking away phantom sparks. A fringe belief here holds that if you whisper a secret while stroking the bar at midnight, your words will remain safe from gossip somewhere between confession and superstitious hush. You chuckle to yourself, better than burying secrets under a silver buckler. The crowd around you laughs softly, voices warm in the lantern glow at the center of the square. A storyteller in a tattered cloak settles onto a charred log that resembles the baked offerings in Tudor cookbooks. He begins weaving a tale about a ghostly blacksmith whose forge still rattles in the hills when justice is served unjustly. His voice is low, husky, and you feel the story's vibrations roll through the chilled evening air. A single lantern swings above him, casting his gaunt silhouette against the timber-framed houses. You recall the clang of the forge in Section 4, the sparks flying like tiny fireflies around that searing iron ordeal. Here, folklore transmutes legal spectacle into spectral memory community theater where the past lingers in every creak of floorboards. You move to a nearby well, draped now in ivy and silver streamers. Each Halloween, villagers gather to spin yarns of drowned witches whose bones tinkle in the water when the moon is full. They say the well's echo once judged the innocent by buoyancy, much like Morel's freezing dunk. Tonight, children drop acorn boats lined with tiny candles, watching them bob and weave on the surface. If a candle goes out, they shout it marks a soul condemned. If it stays lit, they claim the water has blessed them. You crouch beside a little girl in a woolen cloak, her cheeks as pink as the floating lights. She whispers, "I lit mine for my brother. He's honest, right?" You nod, feeling the soft thrum of communal belief humming like a lullaby. A trio of drummers strikes up again, their rhythm steadying your breathing. You follow the beat toward a circle of standing stones at the forest's edge, the old charred oak pit, cast in miniature, now stone relics blackened by turf fires centuries ago. Offerings of eggshells and rosemary wreaths lie at their base. Eggshell fragments echo water trial eggs from Scottish moors, where rolling white shells across the green once symbolized truth's fragile journey. You pick up a pale fragment, the shell grainy in your hand, and feel a chill as if touched by Morel's wakening in icy water. A fringe claim suggests that combining eggshell dust with river mud can ward off slander. An alchemical rebuttal to trial by buffet of baptisms and broth. You snap a silent photo for your memory hashtag eggshell evidence, despite the ancient stones forbidding modern tech. The storyteller beckons you back to the square, where a small play is about to begin. Actors clad in patchwork robes mime the trial. By wafer, each biting into stale barley bread instead of consecrated hosts. When one actor pretends to choke, children gasp and clutch their lanterns. You recall Margot's calm chewing and the chapel's hush. Here, the fake choke becomes slapstick relief, a carnival-style lampoon of sacred dread. A pedestrian aside floats through your mind. Which choking as performance art? What a binge-worthy viral series. Laughter ripples, easing the collective. Memories, sharper edges. Next. An elderly man passes you a mug of spiced cider. Its cinnamon clove steam rising like incense. He tells you that in his youth, villagers danced around the well barefoot on St. John's Eve, recalling the courage of water trials. The cider's tannins pucker your lips, and you taste a hint of last year's apple core. You lean against a timber post, boots sinking into the damp hay strewn for comfort. The market smells sweet cider, fried dough, sawdust, tankers you. A tapestry of senses woven from ruin and revelry as midnight nears. The crowd drifts toward a towering bonfire at the field's edge. Pagan-robed figures approach the blaze, carrying the charred oak stump as a torch. A hush falls as the flames roar aloft, hurting sparks into the star-dark sky. You inhale deeply, tasting smoke and maple sugar from last night's breakfast. This conflagration memorializes not guilt or innocence, but communal resilience flames, devouring the past to light shared futures. Scholars still argue whether modern reenactments challenge historical violence or risk perpetuating its allure under sanitized costumes. You step back from the heat, letting embers drift behind you like fireflies breaking free. The storyteller's final line rings out. Remember, justice must be kind, or else its memory turns to ash. The words swirl through the night air, nestling into your chest with a gentle weight. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling its woolen fibers coarse yet comforting like the linen wraps on Morel's calves or the leather thong on Ivra's iron ring. On your way out, you pass the souvenir stalls once more. Now the miniature iron bars lie unsold in dusty corners, while candied apples glisten from skewers, their caramel coating cracked under flickering lamp glow. A child offers you a toffee leaf, promising it wards off gossip, another form of ordeal-based protection. You accept with a smile and bite down, the sugar fracturing on your teeth. It tastes like honeyed salve mingled with tart apula, sensory callback to so many trials where flavor stood in for fate. You step beyond the lantern-lit square into the darkened forest path, your boots sinking softly in moss and memory. Beneath the star-speckled sky, you feel the imprint of every trial fire, water, metal, and wafer coing in folklore's gentle persistence. Tradition and memory have stripped these ordeals of their terror while preserving their core tension, the human yearning for certainty in a world of shadows. As the drumbeat fades behind you, you carry the smoky scent of oak and the sticky sweetness of toffee on your breath. Reminders that ancient rites live on in stories, festivals, and tiny superstitions whispered between neighbors. And tomorrow, you'll wake with the taste of cider on your tongue, the echo of ghostly forges in your ears, and the soft smile of people gathering around fireside tales, lost rituals reborn in communal warmth. You wander along the edge of a quiet riverbank at dusk, the water's surface rippling with lazy sighs instead of the violent bubbles you once counted under Morel's icy plunge. The air carries a soft chill, tinged with peat smoke from distant hearths, a soothing contrast to the acrid iron tang you breathed when Ibarra pressed hot metal to his palm. Here, under a violet sky, you reflect on how faith, fear, and fairness tangled through every trial you witnessed. The sky deepens to indigo, and you realize that each ordeal fire, water, iron, bread served as a ritual hinge between what people believed and the anxieties they could not name. You pause to run your fingertips over a mossy stone. Feeling its damp coolness, whisper stories of trials long past. You remember scavenging for nettle leaves beside the scalding cauldron, and you smirk at the thought of a modern spa marketing embarrassing burn detox. A mainstream fact comes to mind. The Witchcraft Act of 1735 reclassified witchcraft as fraud, abolishing legal ordeals in Britain for good. That act marked the death knell of boiling broth and dunking stools, officially replacing divine tests with rational statutes. Yet, you sense the residue of those rituals stubbornly lingering like ghostly smoke trapped in castle walls. A fringed tale floats through your mind in a remote Catalan village. A baker once claimed his dough rose faster because he whispered. Confessions into the flour before needing an odd echo of whispering secrets to embers in India. You chuckle to yourself. Next time your sourdough fails, maybe you need a secret apology. Historians still argue whether such local customs were sincere strands of communal trust or cunning scams preying on collective credulity. But either way, the logic remains: people will always seek external signs to resolve inner doubts. The river's murmur shifts like soft ASMR, and you close your eyes, letting the water's gentle cadence carry away the last sharp edges of memory. You recall Aldrid's blindfolded oath, the carp's zen indifference, and you giggle at the mental image of a fish rolling its eyes in boredom. Think of Margot calmly chewing her wafer no cough, no divine rodent scampering out of her throat hand. You marvel at how simple bread could deliver more terror than flame. You imagine today's influencers filming a hashtag which test challenge with crunchy rice cakes instead of consecrated wafers. It'd probably trend higher than most conspiracy theories. Your feet press into soft earth, smelling moss and hazelnut from surrounding shrubs. You muse that the same elements earth, fire, water, air played starring roles in each ordeal, as if nature itself sat in judgment. You taste that final breath of wind, crisp and true, and you wonder if ancient peoples felt closer to divine will when rituals harnessed raw elements. You see the flicker of lamplight from a distant cottage where families gather, sharing stories by hearth and well, perhaps unaware of how those stories originated in brutal tests. You recall the forensic lab's hum, the sterile promise of DNA, evidence replacing infernal flames, and you smile at how cleverly humans reinvent their rituals. A modern aside drifts through. If you ever lose your phone, maybe just call the IT department. No boiling water required. Yet you realize that every generation crafts its ordeals, from medieval fire rituals to modern polygraphs, all seeking that elusive clarity. Historians still argue whether forensic science truly redeems those old errors or simply cloaks new injustices. In sleek lab coats, as you move off the riverbank onto a winding forest path, pine needles rustle underfoot like whispered secrets. You feel a curious kinship with every accused whose heart thundered against iron bars, every tinker who trusted floating carp, and every midwife who bit into trembling hosts. The twilight wraps you in its quiet embrace, reminding you that fear and faith are woven into the human fabric. Fairness, it seems, it's always been a fragile bloom blossoming under uncertain skies. A branch snaps nearby nature's tiny punctuation, and you startle. Then chuckle at your own jump. You wonder if, centuries ago, that same snap might have signaled divine disapproval. Instead, it reminds you how alive the world still is. How lightly judgment now moves compared to the crushing weight of ancient ordeals. You brush a fallen leaf from your shoulder's veins, dark as old ink can't trace its pattern. Thinking about the margin notes in those dusty registers, you step into a small clearing where moonlight filters through branches, pooling at your feet in silver patches. You take a deep breath, tasting that mineral edge of night, and realize that every trial you've witnessed was an attempt to seize truth from smoke and water. Now, in this gentle darkness, truth feels simpler found in shared stories and quiet moments, not in searing burns or scalding dips. 3 light jokes drift across your thoughts. 1. When the fish finally speaks, it'll probably ask for a better script. 2. The bees in that Catalan dough story deserve a raise. 3. Plea bargains. Are the modern spoonful of sugar better? Go down smooth. Each quip ripples a soft smile across your lips. You stand still, wrapped in the hush of the forest, faith and fear fading to distant echoes. Fairness now feels like the moon's soft glow and comforting. You whisper to yourself, "We're all just looking for a sign." The woods answer with a gentle sigh. Carrying your words away like driftwood on a slow current, you turn and walk back toward the cottage lights. The path guiding you through stage sets of steam, flame, and echoes. Each step feels lighter than the last ordeal, each breath a quiet victory. And as you leave behind the grove where ancient echoes still linger, you carry forward the uneasy harmony of faith, fear, and fairness, knowing that the human quest for truth can be as tender as twilight itself. The wind breathes softly through the treetops, carrying with it the faintest rustle of leaves that seem to murmur ancient lullabies. You pause at the edge of a clearing where the moonlight spills onto soft grass, illuminating dewdrops that glisten like scattered stardust. Each droplet reflects the night sky's gentle hues, reminding you that even the darkest moments can hold flickers of light. In this hushed expanse, your senses unfurl. The velvet warmth of moss beneath your fingertips, the cool sting of night. Air on your cheeks, the distant hoot of an owl echoing a timeless call. You close your eyes and let your breath slow, matching the rhythm of the world, settling into rest. Gone are the crackle of embers and the hiss of steam. Here, there is only the gentle harmony of nature's exhalation. The path behind you fades into soft shadows, the memory of scalding waters and searing iron melting into the vast calm. Even the tension of judgment and the tremor of fear dissolve, leaving behind a serene acceptance that realms of belief and doubt can coalesce in quiet understanding. As you stand in this tranquil, liminal space, you feel an unspoken reassurance weaving through your thoughts. Justice need not sear or drown, but can be as gentle as dew's kiss at dawn. The forest wraps you in its soothing cloak, each leaf and blade of grass a silent confidant. You sense a tender serenity blooming within, delicate yet resilient, anchoring you to the warmth of shared humanity. Take one last glance at the moon-pocked sky. Let its serene glow wash away the final tendrils of unrest as your heartbeat slows and your eyelids grow heavy. Here, in this soft embrace, you find peace carried on a whisper, hovering between wakefulness and dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.